So we're talking about health conditions. So health conditions encompass a multi-dimensional set, okay, multiple dimensions, physical, mental, we'll see how many dimensions, of objective and subjective. Objective meaning someone else can observe and measure that, but also subjective, that they are perceived by the individual. Processes related to both present and future situations, okay? So you're talking about a health condition that refers to the present, but also to the future. Present and future is what? Structures and functions of the human body. But then it's not just what happens, internally, what Bernard called the internal milieu, but it's also the adaptability to external physical and social environments. So it's a broad set of situations. It's multidimensional set of objective and subjective processes related to present and future structures and functions of the human body, as well as the capacity to adapt, the adaptability to both the physical and the social environment in which every human being lives, okay? Now, everyone agrees that health conditions are something more than diseases. Diseases are the obvious example of a health condition, right? It's multidimensional. They have an objective set of elements. You can take an electrocardiogram. It's also a subjective element. You can talk about the present condition of a disease and future. What is the future, the prognosis, the evolution. It affects structures and functions, and it also is influenced by our capacity or adaptability to adapt. However, these are the clear example, but everyone agrees that conditions are something more than diseases. And we always say that there's something more. And as I was reading your pre-test, almost all of you cited the famous definition of health by the World Health Organization. We're talking, remember, these are health conditions. So the first question is, what is health? There's something more than disease. So what is it? So let's take the definition. You all know it very well. You all wrote about it. A state, this is in the preamble of the WHO Constitution. And believe me, every word in this definition was carefully debated and thought through. And here it is, a state of complete physical, mental, and social well-being, and not merely the absence of disease and infirmity, right? Not merely the absence of disease and infirmity. So let's try to deconstruct, and I'm going to focus on a few words that I think are problematic. So the first word is a state, right? A state. Now, for me, the problem here is the use of the singular. If this had said states, the plural, it would be fine. But state in the singular implies a static condition, right? It's a state. You're here in this state right now, and that's it. So it has this static sense to it. Second, the word complete. How complete can it be? There is a problem here of dealing with states of health that are less than perfect health. And as there's a whole literature of critiques of this definition, and many authors have said, no one would ever be healthy, right? Because it's an impossibility. If you read The Magic Mountain by Thomas Mann, there's a statement where someone says, I am perfectly healthy, and that doesn't exist. So the completeness, the absolute character of this definition. And then it goes to address the question of multidimensionality. It said it's physical, fine, we do have a physical body, our biology, mental, but then it adds this concept of social well-being. And you start wondering, what is social well-being, right? I mean, is it conformity to norms? And does then this allow for a confusion between healthy and normal, where normal is implies an expectation. And it, of course, opens a whole door to abuse. This is not hypothetical. If you look at the abuse of psychiatric diagnosis in the former Soviet Union, you would say that those people were not conforming to social norms, including the absence of political dissent as a deviance from expected health, social health, right? So what is social health? And many people have said this is a dangerous component. It opens the door to all kinds of potential abuses. And then we go to the word well-being. So what is well-being? It poses the risk of being tautological, right? So you say, well, health is well-being, and what is well-being? Well, it's health, right? It's being healthy. But are there non-health dimensions of well-being? Can I be sick and happy, content, satisfied, even though I have an objective disease? Can I be subjectively in a state of well-being? And then finally, this adverb here, the word merely. And merely, I think it's problematic because it does not invite a reflection on what is it that is lacking. What else is in addition to the absence of disease? Now, of course, this was a definition. It had to be compact. And particularly, it says nothing about elements, for example, on whether, when we talk about the absence of disease or infirmity, we're talking about present performance or capacity for future performance, present states of health or future health of state. It actually blurs the temporal dimension that I was talking about before. So suppose I'm right now here perfectly in front of you and I walk out and I fall dead with a sudden heart attack. Was I healthy when I was talking here or not? Okay? Is the merely absence of disease something related to my future state, or what else is there? And if they had unpacked this and said, what is it that's beyond? Is it the temporal dimension? Is it the other aspects of well-being? But it leaves us wondering what else is there. So in a sense, by saying it's not the absence of disease, it doesn't actually help us to understand exactly what else it is, except to say that it is well-being. So a problematic definition. And we will add in your, this is completely an optional reading, a very recent paper actually was published 2 weeks ago that basically says what I just said, told you, makes this deconstruction. So let me finish by introducing a concept as we try to move forward and make the transition from health conditions to health needs. The concept of an intensity gradient. When we are talking that is not merely the absence of disease, then what is it? And this is a concept that's in your reading. There's the time intensity gradient. But we can think of health conditions in terms, indeed, of a gradient. A gradient going from morbidity all the way to non-morbid states. And I'm just going to list them. Of course, the extreme health condition, the extreme loss of health is to be dead, right? And death in the individual becomes mortality when we talk about a population and we put a denominator. Beyond mortality, beyond being dead, we can be alive but not perfectly healthy, and we can have different degrees of disability. We can then have specific disease. Obviously, diseases will have as a consequence, or may have as a consequence, disability or indeed death. And as we move down this gradient, we start moving into risk factors, which are not specifically diseases, but are health conditions that determine a probability of becoming diseased or disabled or death. For example, smoking is not in itself, except insofar as it is, if you define it as an addiction, then you would say it's a disease, but it's also a risk factor. And then we move in this gradient to physiological conditions that require care. For example, pregnancy, right? Pregnancy is not a disease. It's actually a physiological condition, absolutely essential for the survival and maintenance of our species and the species of every other animal that undergoes pregnancy. So it is a physiological condition. The processes of growth and development in young children are physiological conditions. They are health conditions because if they're not taken care of, then they can become a risk factor. They can lead to disease and disability and death, right? We do have a lot of women who die during pregnancy and childbirth. And then finally, we have positive health, right? And positive health can be variously defined as, Don Abinian talks, functional reserve, the capacity to respond under conditions of stress. So again, it introduces not the present performance, but the capacity to perform. It includes concepts like resilience, the capacity to adapt to a changing environment. It includes indicators like child growth and development. So different domains of positive health, and your reading has a whole chapter on that. And when we go into the section on measurement with Josh Solomon, some of these concepts will come back. So in conclusion, it is clear that the foundational object of our field, which is health, is intrinsically complex. It is probably the field that has more difficulty in defining that object of analysis that defines it. If you go to education, of course, there's a lot of debate of what is education. But I don't think it is as complex and varied and subject to fundamental disagreements as is the definition of health. And this is the source of some of the most enduring debates in our field.